A tag is an annotation family that reports data embedded within a model element. Construction documents use all kinds of tags. We have door tags, window tags, wall tags, and so on. Revit ships with many, but most offices have their own standards, and I'm sure yours is no different. So in this movie, we're going to create a custom room tag. The room tag that I have on screen here is the completed version, and it's based on one of the tags that is shown in the U.S. National CAD Standard. The CAD standard, the U.S. National CAD Standard, or NCS, doesn't ship with any Revit files. So if you decided to purchase and adopt the National CAD Standard, you would be responsible for creating those files yourself in Revit. And so I thought I would use that as the example for creating this custom tag here in this movie. Certainly, if your standards vary from the out-of-the-box Revit or the National CAD Standard, you can use this procedure to create really any tag. It's exactly the same procedure. So with that, let's go ahead and get started here. I'm going to go to the big R, go to New, and we're going to choose Annotation Symbol. In the previous movie, we chose the generic annotation template because we were doing a north arrow, but in this case, we're going to choose the room tag template because we're actually creating a room tag. So I'll go ahead and click Open. And we get the same reference planes marking the insertion point that we saw before, minus the red note this time because this template is already assigned to the room tag category. Now, if you want to verify that, you can see that right up here. So the family and category and parameters icon is available here on the Home tab, and if we click on that, you'll see that the room tags category is already selected for this family. And I'm not going to change that. I'm going to zoom in just a touch here. And as we discussed previously, you might want to start with your text information to give you a sense of scale. Of course, the other way you can do this is if you know the size of the graphic that you're trying to create. Now, in this case, because I'm basing my tag on the National CAD Standard recommendation, I do actually know the size of the symbol that I'm trying to create. It's 3/4 of an inch wide and 3/8 of an inch tall. So I actually have a choice in this case. I could start with the text portion or the graphical portion, and in either case, they will give me a sense of scale. So let's try it with the graphical portion this time. So I'm going to click on the line tool and start with a rectangle, and I'm going to draw that rectangle like so. Now, like most things in Revit, you sort of start with a rough size, and then you modify it. So in this dimension, it's 3/8 of an inch tall, and in this dimension, it is 3/4 of an inch tall, or wide rather. And then I'll select this, go to Move, and move it from the midpoint here to the intersection right there. So the insertion point that I want for my tag is to be right at the midpoint of this box. Now I need another line going from midpoint to midpoint, and then a couple more lines running vertically, and I'm going to just kind of eyeball them in right now. Because just like we can do in the project environment, here in the family editor, I can create a dimension between each of these lines, pull that dimension out here, and click the little EQ symbol to get those all equally spaced. If I want to do the same thing in this other direction, I can do that. And that ensures that all of those will be equally spaced without my having to do any calculations or quantifications to figure that out. So that's the basic graphic portion of the symbol. These are just simple lines. And now I'm going to add the text-based portion. There are two kinds of text that you can create in the annotation family. You can create text, which is just static text. We saw an example of that in the previous movie when we built the north arrow. There with the letter N was just a piece of text that didn't need to ever change. Or you can create labels. Labels are linked text. That text is linked to some property in the host object that this object will be attached to when we're done. So if I click on the label tool, you'll see I get lots of the same features that I get with text. I can justify it over here. I can choose my types over here. The default size is label 1/8 inch. I'm going to go ahead and accept that. I'm going to click right about here because I have it centered, and an edit label dialog will appear. This list here is determined by the category of this tag. Remember, at the start of the movie, I clicked on the category and parameters dialog to show you that this tag was actually assigned to the room tag category. So these parameters that are available here are the kinds of parameters that you would expect to see in room objects in your project. And the parameter that I want to use is the room name. So all I have to do is select it here off the list and add it to my label. So these are the available parameters over here on the left, and these are the ones I'm adding to the label over here on the right. I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and that places my first label in there. I can do it again right here. Choose number, add it to the label. You can see it creates a sample value of 101. If I wanted to change that, I could. Maybe I want to imply that my numbers ought to be 4 digits rather than 3, so I'll put in 1001. It's entirely up to you. And then the third label, I want to click down here somewhere. The National CAD standard recommends finish designations that are a single character. You can see here that we've got base finish, ceiling finish, and so on available to us in the room object. So I can add those finish designations to my label. So I'm going to start with base finish, and I'm going to add it to the label. Now what you're going to see is it's going to suggest a sample value of base finish, which is awfully long, and it certainly wouldn't fit in that tiny little box. So what I'm going to do is just change this to letter A, all right? Now it turns out I could click OK here and create each of the 4 designations separately as a separate label, or notice that all these buttons are still active. You can go in here now and add the wall finish next, and I can add that to the label, and it will appear as a second parameter within the same label. And I'll change this to a sample value of number 2. Now here, spaces was grayed out under base because that was the first item in the label. So there's no spaces prior to the letter A. But I can actually change this, and I'm going to pad this to 3 spaces so that if I move this out of the way, when we have the letter A here, then it's going to go space, space, and then the number 2, so that I can account for the fact that I have a line there in the middle. Now, there's not a hard science here. You're going to have to do a little trial and error. Maybe it's 2 spaces, maybe it's 3. So I'm going to try 3 and see what happens. So I've got my wall finish next. Then I'm going to do my floor finish. I'll do 3 spaces as well. Make this B. And then finally my ceiling finish. Make that 3 spaces and make that 4. I'm just making up these designations here. Now in this final column, you could check this box, and that would actually put a word wrap, or rather a break, a line break, to move it to the next line. In this case, we want them all to run horizontally, so we don't want to do that. But I could have done that here with name and number to put a return and put those both in the same label. There was actually a reason why I didn't do that, and I'm going to talk about that right now. But first, let me position these. Okay, so you can see that 3 spaces was a little too much. Let me edit label, and let's try 2 for each of those. That's a little better. You can use your arrow keys to nudge this a little. And so we're getting close to what we want here, but you can see we need to do a little fine tuning. 1001 and A2B4 are they're rather large. So what I want to do is select both of these labels, go to Edit Type, duplicate my type, and make it 3/32 of an inch. Now I'm not going to change anything else. I'm going to leave the same font and other settings, but when I do that, it makes that text a little smaller. Now you can see that I probably should have left 3 spaces. Okay, I can come back to that in a moment. The other thing that I want to do is make that text transparent, because that way the lines underneath will show through. Now this one, I can make it transparent just to be sure that that room name doesn't accidentally cover up this line later in the project. It looks okay right now, but you never know. I'm going to select this, go to Edit Label, go back to 3. There's a lot of trial and error in the Family Editor, so there's our basic setup. So we started with the graphics. That gave us the overall sense of scale. Then we dropped in the labels. We're now going to save it. We'll give this a name. And if you remember from the previous movie, I always like to change the number of backups down to 1, and we'll click Save. And then we'll load it into our project. So now when I choose Load into Project, it's actually offering me 2 choices, because at the start of the movie, you may recall, I had the completed version of this file available, and it's still open here in Revit. So it is actually possible for me to load it simultaneously into more than one project, or to choose different projects that I want to load it into. And in this case, I want to make sure I'm loading it into my office building project. So I've got that checked, and I'm going to click OK. So just pay attention and make sure you read that when this dialog appears. So now I'm here in my office building, and what you'll see is all the rooms are highlighting because the new tag that I'm creating is actually appearing directly here on my cursor, and I can simply click and place it into an existing room. This project already had room tags in here, which is helpful because it shows us that the room tag is functioning properly, and we're seeing that this room that it was associated with is already picking up the correct name and the correct number. It does not, however, list any of the finish information yet. So to take care of that, all we need to do is select the room, scroll down over here, and start inputting some finish designations into these parameters. So the base finish is going to be V for vinyl, the ceiling finish will be A for ATC, the wall finish will be P for paint, and the floor finish will be C for carpet. And when I apply that, you're going to see all of those designations fill into the tag. If I wanted, I could now continue and apply that tag to multiple rooms in the project. What we see here in this movie is that in addition to the graphics and the text that we explored when we built our North Arrow, we have the very powerful label feature, which allows us, coupled with the correct category, in this case room tag, to attach to and read information off of the host object, rooms in this case, and then that information is fed back to the tag. And that's how we create intelligent annotation in our Revit projects.